I always write my full name as well as the date, and you don't really have to do this if you're writing in a notebook, but I usually write my notes on loose leaf paper, so writing these two things is absolutely essential. One time I forgot to write my name on a math exam. It wasn't good. Let's just leave it at that. And of course, the date is to help you organize your notes, and also it helps you remember when you wrote those notes. So when you study for your exam, you have a better memory. The outline method mainly focuses on main titles and then writing any information or bullet points, etc. below. So in this case, I am writing some notes for data management, and the chapter is 7.3, geometric distribution. So under that, I write any definitions or things like that, and I always highlight my main titles in pink and any keywords or subtitles in yellow. These are the only two highlighting colors I use because I feel like when I use any more, it gets really distracting to my eyes, and let's be honest, over highlighting, even though it's fun, it's kind of crazy sometimes. So the cool thing about the outline method is that you can keep on creating any subtopics. So as you can see, I started off with my title, geometric distribution, and then I wrote some definitions, etc. But then I had some further information, which I use a little arrow to point out. I also number any bullet points that require numbers. And since this is math, like many other courses, we are given examples. So one thing a lot of people do is that they put a bunch of examples and no one knows what's going on. So I always put a little number in lowercase right beside my EX. And as you can see as well, I'm using short form for example because writing the whole word takes a little bit too long. So when I do math examples, I always write the question in blue pen and I always answer in red. These are the only two pen colors I use as well. I don't bother using any other colors. This way it's super easy to detect what the question is and what the steps are. And when you go on to do any studying or any homework questions, you can just follow along the red steps. You know exactly where your math steps are or other subjects, and it's super easy to do. One thing you notice overall are my notes are pretty spaced out. I don't have words crammed in every single line or every single margin, and something that's really important about note-taking is not to cram everything together because visually it makes your brain really confused, and also it's just much easier to read and to memorize when you have a little bit of space in between your notes. So here I am solving a very easy expected value problem for data management, and as you can tell, I actually put a square around my answer because again, when I want to check my answer, when I do any questions or if I do this example again, it's super easy to detect what the answer is and not to spend so long looking for it. Another thing very common in many subjects is you'll have like a major keyword or a super important equation. So in those cases, I will put another square around it as well as highlight it. Obviously on top of it, I will write which equation it is, and if need be, I will state what the variables are. Essentially, writing notes is all about knowing what's important. If you highlight and underline and point out every single little detail, your notes aren't really useful at all. Actually, they're kind of confusing. So highlighting and making sure that you are an active learner and realizing what the important bits of information is a really key and important habit to note-taking. An active learner really just means someone who knows and understands what's going on. Sometimes when I take notes, I just literally copy letter by letter and I have absolutely no idea what I'm copying down. But when you're an active learner, you actually take in the information before spitting it onto your paper. And some really key tips for becoming an active learner is to understand first and foremost what you're reading, what you're writing down before you actually make a carbon copy of it. Another thing to keep in mind is you have to paraphrase. If you write everything word by word, it's going to take you forever to copy down those notes. And especially when you go to university, the professors won't wait for you to copy down every single word. So it's really important to paraphrase and to use short forms, which we'll be going into in chapter 2. Another thing to be aware of is sometimes teacher will give us that little hint that a question will also appear on the exam or a test. They usually say, hey guys, this question is really important. So when that happens, a lot of people just try to remember mentally, but I always write down a little side note saying that it will be on the test or the exam, so when study time comes around, I make sure I know that question like the back of my hand. For the outlining method, I make sure to summarize any important notes or ideas or things that I keep on messing up on the very first page in the top margin. This becomes my summary page, and after I take my notes, I can just reread the main idea to make sure I actually understand it properly. Okay guys, The second note-taking method I'll be sharing with you guys is the Cornell method. This method was popularized because it was invented at Cornell University, just like the name suggests. And essentially in this case, you're going to divide your paper into 3 sections. The first section is going to be for your notes, the stuff that happens during the lecture, during the class, during the presentation. The column on the left is going to be for any keywords, vocabulary, or any questions you have, equations, just important words that are very short and sweet. And at the bottom, it's going to be for your summary, just to summarize the main ideas of all the notes you took. The only issue I find with the Cornell method is that, let's be honest, it takes a little bit longer just to create the chart. As simple as the chart is, some crazy teachers we all have go so quickly that we barely have time to even write our names. So there are 2 main ways to incorporate the Cornell method into your note-taking system. Either you pre-make all your little charts in your notebook or your loose leaf paper, or you use it specifically for classes that you don't have to write notes super quickly. And the one great thing about the Cornell method is that it really makes your brain focus and zoom in on the important information as well as the important questions, keywords, and equations that you'll very likely be seeing on the test. The final note-taking method I'll be sharing with you guys is the mind mapping method. Now this is for all our visual learners out there because let's be honest, not all of us can learn super well just by looking at words and words and words. So mind mapping is a really great method to get your ideas down, or if you have a ton of notes, a ton of information floating around, to pull out the main subjects, the main topics, etc. So for mind mapping, you start off with your main topic in the middle, and then you have what I like to call umbrella subjects. So these subtopics are umbrellaing further and further more topics below them, and essentially here I'm using film videos, upload and edit as an example, as well as clean room, donate clothes, etc. So essentially you're going smaller and smaller, and this is a really great way to visually plot out the information you have. Next, onto some note-taking methods that are directly related to studying. So sometimes we might take really pretty notes, but they aren't that effective in helping us study. So here are a few tips I have for you guys, and these tips I use all the time. So the first one, and definitely my favorite one, is to use many acronyms. I'm quite famous for my funny and weird acronyms, and I'll be sharing some of them with you guys today. The first one I'll be sharing is one I use for data management, and by the end of the year, studying for the exam, over half the class use the same acronym. So this one, I'm not really spelling out a word, it's just more like a funny little saying, I guess. So here we are talking about sampling techniques, and I just said SSSCMCD. For some reason, it was really easy for me to remember, and like I mentioned, by the end of the course, everyone else was chanting it with me right before our exam. And a really great study tip I use all the time, and you don't really have to use sticky notes for it, is to cover up any information you know you have to memorize. And when you want to test yourself, all you have to do is, without looking, with it covered up, chant it out loud to yourself, and then check by taking off the sticky notes. Another acronym I want to share with you guys is super important for those of you taking grade 11 biology. So this one, you just have to remember the taxonomy levels of animals and stuff like that, or just living creatures in general, I guess. So here we have domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. Here we are using mnemonic devices to create some sort of funny sentence or catchphrase that really helps us remember. A really good example of a famous mnemonic device is probably every good boy deserves fish, or all cows eat grass, which are 2 very popular ones we use to learn music. So in this case, I made up my own, and it was, did K-pop play constantly outside? Fabulous girls' generation slayed. So it's just kind of something funny that helps you remember, and this method is great because you can personalize it depending on some things you like or things that help you remember. And the last writing, note-taking kind of hack I want to share with you guys is to use many abbreviations. So here I am sharing with you guys some of my favorites as well as most commonly used. So of course we all know the EX, for example. I love using the W with a slash for with and BC for because. So sometimes, especially in language classes, we have to write these essays where we're literally repeating the same words over and over again. I remember this one time in English, I had to write this essay about civilization, and I had to use that word so many times, so I just shortened it to civ, and every time I needed to write civilization, I just ignored the long word and just wrote short form civ. Okay guys, so at this point we learned about note-taking methods, systems, as well as some general tips for when you write down the important information. But now let's take an example of what not to do when it comes to note-taking. And I want you guys to watch along and point out all the errors that we see together. So starting off, this note has way too many colors going on. I don't even know what to read, what to look at. It's really, really confusing. And on top of that, the font is all different sizes, the highlight is just going everywhere, and this note is just not very well done when it comes to color. Another thing is the writing is super illegible. I can barely see what I'm reading here, and what's the point of taking notes if you don't even know what you read yourself? And as I mentioned before, I love using little symbols and drawings when I take my notes, but this time I just went a little overboard and there's even random tic-tac-toe hanging out and it's not working too well. Another thing is I'm a huge fan of using little arrows for when I would do bullet points or things like that, but here the arrows seem to have taken some steroids and become humongous, and everything is just floating around, and looking at this paper for any longer is going to give me anxiety, so let's just get out of here. So that's the end of the video. I really hope you guys enjoyed, and thank you so much for watching. I love you guys, and I'll talk to you guys later. Bye bye.